You believe in the users?
My user has information that could make this free system again.
Are you a user?
He came here to help us.
Your user can't help you now, my little program.
If the users can no longer help us, we're lost.
Prepare to terminate.
You're gonna jump. It's the only way to help Tron.
Don't you need to rest?
Don't worry.
The thing that intrigued me about animation, there were a couple things that I really liked about animation. One was the fact that not too many people were doing it. In Boston at that time, it was already very strange to get into film, let alone animation. I liked that aspect of it. It was sort of rebellious to get into that. I had a partner back there named Eric Ladd, and between the two of us, we just started getting in animation. I mean, at the most fundamental level you can imagine. I mean, Bolexes and Aries cameras with, stop motion motor drives added to them. And we used to cut our own cells. We made a film called Cosmic Cartoon, which then got nominated the first year of the Student Academy Awards. And it was sort of a tripped out, arty film. So even back then, we were sort of on the horns of a dilemma. The original Lisberger Studios was artistically inclined, not commercially inclined. But once you start getting in animation, you need help and you need people, support. You need other artists to work with. And then you need the money for the facility and, to pay these people to keep them all under one roof. And so very quickly you realize that you're going to have to become commercial. And we started doing commercials in Boston, and we were excited about backlit animation, which was a way to create visual effects that weren't based on reflective light. It wasn't painted cells. It was mats with light shining directly into the lens of the camera, and the light would be diffused. And you got very intense colors because you used theatrical gels, so the saturations were really pleasing. People weren't doing backlit characters. They were using it as an effect to make things glow and pulse and logos. And what we did was we tried to do a character that was backlit. And two of the key people at Lisberger Studios were two animators, John Norton and Roger Allers.
This was a tiny studio of, people in their 20s just getting together and doing whatever they could find to do. We were doing commercials. We did Sesame Street, Electric Company, that kind of stuff. And Steve was kind of the force that held the whole studio together.
John did a drawing of a line character, and then we transferred it to Codaliths, and we backlit it. And that test was this liquid neon character. And he was electronic. And since he was electronic, we nicknamed him Tron. In his first carnation, just this little test, he smashed these two discs of light together, and they exploded and circled around and came back. And it worked out really well, that little piece of animation. And so we had this electronic warrior as a character in the studio, but we weren't sure what we were really going to do with that yet.
Steve sold it as a radio promo spot.
Rock 94.5. WCOZ.
It was pretty strong. It was pretty striking. And I think he sold it to more than one radio station. He was good at doing that. And that was the start. He was thinking, yeah, we could do a whole backlit character, and the whole movie could be like that. And that was sort of the germ of it, was just light on black. Here's this guy who just made a studio out of nothing. He was a guy who just believed in whatever he wanted to do. And I think that's what always inspired everybody. He was always somebody who could gather everybody together, get them excited by their ideas, and just say, yeah, let's make a movie. That kind of Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland thing. Oh, I've got a brush, I've got a barn. You put things together, out of what you had at hand. And no one ever thought of, oh, this is going to fall on its face. We were much less cynical back then, I guess.
At the time, I was producing stage plays with the Boston Repertory Theater that I helped found, and I was also a lawyer representing a lot of the artists who was associated with the theater. And I was introduced to Steven Lisberger, who was making animated commercials at the time. And he had this dream of creating an animated Olympics. and he had gotten a grant from the American Film Institute to create an animated Olympic short. So we took this clip to New York City and basically sold 2 animated specials to NBC, to Don Ohlmeyer at the time, that was head of the Olympics, and we sold animated Winter Olympics and an animated Summer Olympics.
There he is, the new Mr. Heavyweight, Ivan Disovensky.
You've got to understand, at the time in Boston, you know, we had all the animators that you could get, and there were about 6 of us. And so here we had 2 television specials that we were supposed to deliver for the 1980 Olympics, and we didn't have enough people. So we packed up, moved 20 people, because we had ink and paint people, and we also had background people, and we moved the whole studio, the Gypsy Caravan, all the way out to Venice, California. And at that point, we were already thinking about a Tron film, but it was down the road. We had to do Animal Olympics first. And we came out here and set up shop and brought in many other people who were local.
It was designed so it could be inserted like the regular coverage during the Olympics, but we could cut in and out. And now let's check and see how the cartoon athletes are doing.
Now he gets ready for his big dismount.
Look at that height!
Whoa, beautiful landing, and a little something extra for the crowd. And that 9.5 means a gold medal for the Asian Bruce Quakamoto.
We had 2 specials. One came out in the wintertime, but by the summertime one, the U.S. protested the Russians invading Afghanistan, so the Olympics were canceled for the Americans, and so was our movie just as we finished it. So that was when we were starting to shift over to the idea of Tron.
We were, in 1979, thinking about trying to make Tron as an independent movie. And what happened was, when the Olympic boycott occurred, it so undermined the momentum of the studio that we now needed to get involved with someone who could, you know, make Tron a reality on the scale it needed to be made on.
Then we had in computer experts, people who were in the field developing things. We had in Alan Kay, who was one of the guys who was developing basically the concept for personal computers. I remember him in and talking to us about, yeah, we're seeing this idea for computers that could be like a briefcase, you know, and you could just open it up and you could take it anywhere you wanted and plug it in, and you could tap into any library in the world. And we were all thinking, that sounds really cool. All these things were really inspiring, and we kept listening to the way computers were designed to look for equivalents in terms of story, in terms of societal structure. You know, the way the computer communicates with itself would suggest what kind of societal structure would be in the computer.
You're getting brutal, Sark. Brutal and needless necessity.
Thank you, Master Control.
And there were also these other aspects of, you know, how the users communicated with the programs.
Yes, sir. We don't have much time left to find that file. This is top priority. Yes, sir. I know, sir. This isn't just correcting my bank statement or phone bill problem again. This is a must. I understand, sir.
And whether this, you know, sort of had a parallel with some sort of like a religious experience of this world communicating with these large controlling forces. So there were all these things working on different levels.
It's begun.
What would be the champion in the future? Would it be the mainframe or the personal computer?
Your access suspended. Report to Dillinger.
It was kind of like an authoritarian government.
I said move!
Versus a democratic government.
This is the key to a new order. This code disc means freedom.
And I think that's one of the main themes that was dealt with in Tron. And it was very prophetic of what really happened.
Within the story, it portrays the computer as an all-powerful tool.
We have one of the most sophisticated pieces of equipment in existence.
Oh, I know all that.
And I would say within the actual production of the movie, the computer is kind of the all-powerful tool, too. And I think that has been prophetic. I think it's happening today. I mean, it's gradually taking over every area of production.
This group of people making Tron was saying that there's a new space that's happening that's completely other. It's not in suburbia. It is disquieting to think about. And it is moving really fast, and it could affect all aspects of our lives. And, you know, I don't know whether people were still thinking, well, it's going to be HAL or something, you know, is going to gobble us up. But my feeling was, well, if there is this other world happening, what could be better for it than to get as many artists involved with it as soon as possible? Because to me, the artists were the remedy to overthinking it from a scientific standpoint. So it wouldn't just be about efficiency, and it wouldn't just be about, you know, things that were literal. That the artists, if they got involved in cyberspace, would bring metaphysical aspects alive or point them out that had to do with things like the users, or even just to shape it and give it some humanness.
Chris Lane was doing these big environmentals of the computer world. He always worked on black paper, and all these things were very dynamic, stretching off into the distance, and sometimes they were like futuristic cowboy shootouts, other times they were like car races, and those, I have to say, were really what was selling this picture.
At the time, we had a room down in Venice where we had artwork up, and you could sort of, we would bring people down there, people from the various studios, and they would stand in this room and look at all this really far out artwork, and they'd say, wow, this feels amazing looking at this stuff, but I don't know.
When you sat in it, you felt a little bit like you were in a wooden goldfish bowl. It was a strange little room, but having these drawings plastered around the room, he would do his dog and pony show, getting people interested in it.
And when we came out to Disney, we had our script, which was entirely storyboarded already, and we had a lot of production design work. And we had the approach to make the movie. We had figured out that we wanted to film it in live action and then use codaliths and combine it with computer animation. All that had basically been figured out. But when we came out here, the attitude was, well, this is very exciting, but how's this possible?
There was a tremendous amount of trust that was given to both, you know, especially to Steven, because, you know, no one knew what he was really talking about. We kind of had this vague idea and had these fantastic drawings. And I remember going to a meeting that Tom Wilhite had set up to get us excited about it, and had some artwork, and they had Steven, and he's trying to tell us the story, and Donald was there, and it was, you know, I think most of the people were kind of looking at each other saying, you know, I don't have a clue, you know, inside this computer and this game, and this guy's going to go back and forth, and he's going to be sucked in, and all this stuff, and everyone was looking at each other going, aha, aha. At the same time, it was, you could tell by the presentation that these people were passionate, that they believed that, you know, there was no question that this was going to be something special, and it was going to be very, very unique. And I think at the time, we were looking for something unique. We were looking for something different that audiences were going to respond to.
It was Disney that sort of connected with it on a sort of gut level, because it felt like, I hate to use this word, but almost Fantasia energy, that it was really designed by artists, and it was experimental, and it was adventuresome.
Disney was always the company we wanted to go to, because we thought that this was, since it involved computer animation and it involved a lot of other special effects, that this was made for Disney. We showed them sample footage or backlit slides, and it was such an exciting visual that I think in Ron Miller's mind, and maybe Tom Wilhite's mind, who was the executive, they kept saying to themselves, what would Walt do in this case?
We wanted to recapture that excitement that years ago Walt had done with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Swiss Family Robinson, some of the real classics.
Something about Walt Disney, whenever he saw a new technology, other people might have been afraid of it, but he could immediately see the possibilities in it and use it. You know, use it to his advantage and create something new out of it. In the case of Tron, I would say it's taking computer technology, which was in its infancy at the time, and making something new with it. You know, turning it into a film, which I think a lot of people felt like, yeah, big deal, so what? But it was a big deal.
What made the studio decide to really push on with the movie, I think, was the video game craze that was happening through America at that time, the arcades and their success, the marketing potential of it, you know, the things that were going to come out of it. And I think that they had sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the big effects movies that were being made to do something here. At that time, they weren't making any films other than the Herbie films, and they were recycling their animation a lot, so they didn't have a lot of product coming out at all.
Well, Disney, just before Tron was released, was at kind of this in-between sort of period. And, you know, we were searching really desperately to try to find something that was going to break through and be popular for young people. And at the time, Disney was kind of considered old-fashioned. It wasn't as contemporary. A lot of the other studios were doing projects that were, frankly, more exciting at the time. And so when Tron came along, it was met with a lot of anticipation by the younger people at the studio. And I think the older generation at the studios, a little bit of a transition time, were wondering, you know, what in the world is this all about, and what are we doing, and had no clue as to what it was going to be, because it was so far ahead of its time.
Harrison Ellenshaw was the ambassador and the young prince of the Disney lot, and really knowledgeable and great taste, and was sort of acted. I saw how valuable he would be to us here at Disney, because he knew everything that one needed to know about Disney Studios, how things got done. And he did work on Star Wars, and his heritage is a great one back to his father, Peter Ellenshaw.
We were just finishing up on Watcher in the Woods, and I remember being in my office one day and Steven Lisberger walked in, and I had never met him before, and he came in and he told me very passionately about the screenplay of Tron. And he also had with him a number of illustrations, and it was pretty evident that this guy already had done a lot of work and had a lot of people do some work on what looked to be a very speculative and very different and very interesting film.
Harrison had a lot of respect among the people who were running the studio as far as what kind of special effects things they could do, because he was a well-known matte painter, as his father was. And so he was the person I think they looked to say, you know, can we really do this? And he'd say, yeah, you know, I think these guys can do this.
All the way along, you know, I think everyone was looking at Harrison's eyes and making sure he wasn't blinking, you know, to make sure that, in fact, to say, yeah, you know, he says he can do it, so, okay, I guess it can be done.
I had the initial situation where I did have to kind of bridge this gap between the old guard at Disney and the new young Turks coming on board to do this backlit stuff and this computer stuff.
Steven Lisberger, you know, had a very kind of a street fighter approach to everything, and he was very blunt in how he spoke, and he didn't mince words. And I got the feeling that a lot of people in management at that time were kind of afraid of him. They didn't know what to do with him, really.
But after a while, I think there was certainly the ability for each side to live with the other side, because there was something that was so new, and the studio really wanted to show that they were capable of doing something new.
Their main concern was production problems, how we were going to put all this together. So when we got to Disney, the project sort of froze here, and while I did a test, a Codalith backlit test, to determine whether these techniques would actually work.
Well, the studio decided that since this was a first-time director, and since this first-time director was proposing a rather, some would say, outrageous way of making a film, Steven was allowed to go and shoot a number of scenes using actors dressed in kind of gray costumes. He shot it on to 35mm black and white, and then the Codaliths were made. And the interesting part about the test is that these actors were all against white backgrounds.
We had a young Frisbee champion named Sam Schatz who came in, and we had all this great stuff that they gave us that was left over from Black Hole. And we put this costume on Sam, and he threw his Frisbee, and he broke out of some prison cell, I think, and blasted one of those black hole robots or something. We did some backgrounds and composited the whole thing.
The tests were successful. It proved that Steven could direct. It proved that the technology would work. But it was Bruce Logan who said, after the test had been completed, after the ink and painting had been completed and the compositing of the characters against backgrounds had been completed, he said, you know what, we should consider shooting this against all black instead of white.
We went black because, frankly, there weren't enough lights in Hollywood to create the amount of white that we needed to do that. Because obviously, if you're trying to make a black background, you don't have to light the black background. If you have a white background, everything has to be lit. And we were working at such incredible f-stops and low shutter angles, and we were welding with light on that show.
And I can remember going home that night and literally taking drawings and markers and marking and doing it so that I could actually figure it out, what would happen if you shot against black and where you would have to roto versus if you shot against white and where you would have to paint. And doing some rough calculations on how long it would take you to roto versus how long it would take you to paint and so on and so forth. And we really kind of had to make a very significant decision, because if we were going to go the wrong way, we wouldn't have completed the film.
The studio was really pleased with how that test came out, and I think, you know, that so surprised them when they felt, oh my God, this is never going to work. That when it did work, the pendulum swung back with a lot of force. And now it's like, if this works, then maybe all sorts of other things that this film is attempting to do could work equally well.
The thin ice that Disney walked out on that day was computer simulation. Backlighting the characters and coming up with that solution was something I think we all figured that could work. But computer simulation at that time, nobody had really used in the mass amount of time and done that amount of footage that we needed to do this movie. And there was some skepticism about its dependability and whether any company could do that. And I had done a reel for Information International, the III sample reel that had shown at SIGGRAPH, where I did this juggler and edited together all the work that we had done there, which was some pretty significant stuff at that time. And it was put together in a way that was really professional. It wasn't just flying logos and a bunch of stuff that people were doing put next to some music. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and was really professionally done in a way. And I think that Disney, when they saw that, believed that there was somebody out there who could manage this and design it and make it work and make the processes fit together.
We then got a green light sometime in November with the idea that the schedule was to start shooting in end of April.
Richard Taylor came on board and had two main areas of responsibility, two huge areas. He was going to undertake the direction and the supervision, basically, of the computer graphics, as well as help determine the look. He was well known for the 7-Up commercials, the candy apple look of the late 70s that was very intriguing, and we knew the backlight compositing to give that kind of wonderful glows.
And that's when Steve and I really started meshing together and sat down and started doing drawings and talking about the way that the processes could fit together. And I suggested that we could do all the backgrounds and the craft and all of that in CG. And that by doing that, we could have this phenomenal kind of movement in the movie. We could do this point of view that nobody had ever seen.
Richard championed the backlight and also was connected with III, so was also very knowledgeable about computer graphics, and had known Sid Mead. I was very interested in getting Mobius on the project, which Donald made happen, and it turned out that the combination of those two was just beautiful, because Sid is so futuristic and so stylish in such a severe way, and Mobius, his artwork is so spiritual and charming, that between the two it really felt right.
Sid Mead is one of the world's most phenomenal designers and futurists. I think the work that he did in Tron was exceptional. I think it gave a kind of style and class that helped set up the stylization of the movie, which was critical for it to hold up over time and for it to be something that was new. Mead did the tanks and the light cycles and Sark's carrier and some of the MCP. I did a lot of the design on the MCP. He did a lot of it, the first real big pass at it. Mobius did costume design. He did the Solar Sailor. It was really a nice marriage of the two. And Peter Lloyd, his stylizations were primarily in doing illustrations, taking those designs and adding his particular kind of airbrush touch to it to give us a feel for the studio and for everyone to see kind of what we wanted this to look like.
It seemed a little odd to me. I mean, just from the artwork that I saw, I mean, it seemed really visually extreme, and I thought this is just going to be a regular animated movie, like a cell cartoon. And then the more he talked about it, I realized, oh, this is kind of a live-action movie, but then it's not either. You know, I couldn't place it in my head as to what it was. So I was really confused about its identity. And it wasn't until Mobius started doing actual storyboards of it that I began realizing, yeah, it is a live-action movie, really, but visually very different. What happened was there were about 3 or 4 of us who were storyboarding, but none of us really had the kind of draftsmanship or sense of design or sense of cinematic staging that Mobius did. Eventually, he ended up sort of going over the entire storyboard output, I mean, of everybody, and just basically re-storyboarding the whole thing. Steve wanted to have a complete visual storyboard, a complete document of the movie before he shot it. And that's a standard animation technique, but at the time, that was kind of unusual for live action. Very few live-action directors do that. I believe Hitchcock did. But in the case of a live-action movie that's very heavy with special effects, it's probably a good idea to try to nail down your continuity as tightly as possible.
Animation is very appealing to the sort of traditional artist type because you can work on something at your own pace. You can go to sleep in the morning, you can rework it, you can worry it, and then feel like you can re-engage yourself with the artwork at many points in the process. But live action is very much a performance piece. You know, it's like, we're gonna capture magic in a bottle, you know, here it is. And you never know when that magic is gonna happen. It took me a while to get into that mode of thinking, but Tron was sort of a combination of those two. Because when we were filming the actors, we were only filming part of what was gonna happen. I mean, you saw people in these strange-looking costumes on the stage, but you knew that footage was gonna be reworked.
Hey, it's me, Flynn!
So it was a challenge to give up even that much control in shooting the live action, to know that you really had to get this performance because you weren't going to get these actors back in 3 months or, 6 months. Casting Tron was a very difficult situation. At the time, Disney Studios wasn't the powerhouse it is now. And people would say, am I really going to go out to Disney and do some movie where I, play a Pong character in a video game? I thank God that we got Jeff Bridges. Jeff was, I guess, feeling adventuresome, and the project sounded far out to him, and he just jumped into it.
What was so exciting about Tron was that it was really groundbreaking stuff that this guy was going to do. I was going to play a character who gets sucked inside a computer, and the entire film will take place inside the computer. And I said, oh my God.
Just so I can tell my friends what this dream is about, okay? Where am I?
I thought, well, this is interesting. It's kind of risky and chancy, but man, it's a tough one to turn down because it's a chance to really do something very new. So I got on board.
On the other side of the screen, it all looks so easy.
I've had really good luck with first-time directors, I did Michael Cimino's first film, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. That was his first time out of the gate. And Steve, I could tell after that first meeting how deeply steeped he was into this thing, and he really knew his stuff.
He did an incredible job as Flynn, presenting a sort of the human character who is part of that world, but somehow different to that world.
Uh-oh, we've got company. Clue was actually probably the most fun to play. I really enjoyed playing Clue.
This was before Starman came out, but he did this sort of program-esque Starman kind of voice.
Do you think we can merge with this memory bit?
And then later on, the MCP starts torturing him, and then he becomes much more human-esque.
Forget it, Mr. High and Mighty Master Control! You are making me talk!
And there's really no story reason why he made that change, I'll leave it to Jeff's acting instincts.
At the time, I don't think I was thinking, oh yes, a bit of clue. You know, I wasn't thinking that way, but now as I look at it, I wonder if there was a little clue in Starman.
Really think the users are still there?
They'd better be. I don't want to bust out of here and find nothing but a lot of cold circuits waiting for me.
Well, Bruce had the assignment, which in some ways is the most difficult one of all, to be sort of the Dudley Do-Right, the hero. Originally, I think as the part was conceived, I think it was more of an older sort of beaten warrior type. You know, the film had as its inspiration on some level the sort of Spartacus energy of a sort of Kirk Douglas.
I had been doing Westerns for the most part. And so I was doing a movie for NBC called I Married Wyatt Earp. And I know it's a funny title, but it's the actual memoirs of Josephine Marcus Earp. And we were doing it out in Arizona. And I got a call or message in my hotel that a script would be coming. Would I take a look at it and get back to my agent as fast as possible on it? So eventually I brought it to work one day, early morning, and I was sitting on a horse way out in the middle of the desert, and in my full Wyatt Earp thing with a huge spirit-gummed handlebar mustache and the whole works. And I'm sitting on the saddle while they're lighting, and I'm reading this thing called Tron by Steven Lisberger. And I'm just so out of that world, have no clue as to what it's about. And I said, no, man, I don't even know what this is. What is this?
Bruce Boxleitner had a hard time picturing himself as a video hero in a Disney movie. I don't think he was very into video games at the time. He's sort of a aw shucks kind of guy back then. I mean, he had his ranch and his horses, and he's sort of a Jimmy Stewart type.
They offered it to me again, and they said, please, now we want you to come in. So I'm nearing the end of this TV movie, and I come in, and I meet Steven, and I believe Richard Taylor, and Don Kushner, and then it's a whole different story. I saw storyboards, I saw all kinds of things. And then the biggest plus for me on this thing was that it was a feature at Disney, wow. And Jeff Bridges had signed on. And I said, my God, really? Okay, I'll do it.
Alan, where did you hear that name?
Well, that's your name, isn't it?
The name of my user.
I thought he did a great job in, you know, walking that fine line of, you know, not being like a kind of a robot, but, you know, adding a certain degree of humanity to the part of Tron.
That MCP, that's half our problem right there.
Barnard Hughes was pretty into it. I think he had played that sort of wise older guy so many times that this, I think, to him was a provocative spin on it.
Barnard Hughes was our elder statesman who fell right in there with us. He got sucked right in.
I was catapulted into it, I think. I had a great feeling, as I did when I was in the Army, that a lot of things didn't make any sense to me.
Where's the program?
What program? And just as I trusted General Eisenhower, I trusted somebody up there in Disney that really knew what we were doing and would take care of us, that nothing bad would happen to us.
Had enough?
What do you want? I'm busy.
Originally, Peter O'Toole was going to play the part of David Warner, and he had read the script, and he envisioned tanks and solar sailors. He came out to the studio to see where the construction was of all the sets, and I think he was really disappointed when he found out it was all going to be computerized, and it was going to be put in post-production, and it was really acting against the black screen. And, you know, he dropped out because he just couldn't understand it. He wanted to know where the tanks were.
David's just such a good bad guy, you know. It's I'm guilty of that, of casting a Brit in the role of the bad guy.
One of my favorite people was my adversary. And David Warner, who was a very eccentric, and is a very eccentric British actor.
He has a scene where he says, "You're all gonna die. He captures Barnard Hughes and myself. And I've got to tell you, I didn't have to think about what I wanted to do or how I wanted to feel. I knew I was going to die.
Take that program to the holding pit!
He has such a strong presence.
He had his way, but as I remember, David was the thinnest man I'd ever met.
When I met him on the set, I was very impressed with him because I knew his reputation because he did one of the landmark Hamlets in the London Theatre. Still is considered to be quite wonderful.
Sounds good.
It's one thing to say to these warrior types, these guys, you're going to have this paraphernalia on you, you're going to be fighting with frisbees, but to bring feminine energy in and to limit it by this technology of how we were shooting and how we were treating that was a separate challenge.
Shall we dance?
Cindy was really good about it. I mean, it's back then the idea of wearing such a severe costume and the helmets and all the rest of it was difficult.
When I was told I was playing a character who's a computer program, now to be quite honest, I bought my first computer last Thanksgiving. I didn't have a clue, and you know, so playing a character in a computer was very confusing for me. But I remember thinking, she's a version of me who knows some of the things that the Laura character in the real world knew, but is probably an innocent to many things because she lives in this isolated computer environment. She has no life experiences that Laura has, but she has some of Laura's feelings, some of Laura's emotions. So when I run into the Jeff Bridges character, I recognize him. There's an attraction, but I don't know why.
Danny Shore, I mean, when you see the film, he's this sort of little wiry guy, you know, and he's got a kind of a quirky, almost like a slightly Brooklyn-type accent going there if you look at the film.
My friends, my fellow conscripts, we have scored. I feel so much better.
Graham was an actuarial program who says, I like to serve other people's needs.
Of course, if you think of the payments as an annuity over the years, the cost is really quite minimal.
He was just a boy in service, period. So if you are in service and you see a great leader like Tron, you follow that great leader for the service of mankind. The way that I can describe this experience of shooting Tron, and it's playtime. It was so much play that it's just a matter of playing. Make believe you are on a life cycle. I mean, we'd be sitting there and go, it's coming. I remember hanging out with Jeff and Bruce. We were just kids in a candy store.
When they showed us the costumes, I said, you've got to be kidding. Where are the pants? Where are the pants?
I love the costumes because all I remember is wearing skin-tight pajamas and just bursting with myself. And in walks Cindy Morgan in her skin-tight pajamas.
When I found out what I was wearing, I disappeared for a day, and the AD, the assistant director, kept calling me and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the gym, and I'm not leaving until I lose 5 pounds." And I did.
The costume was very revealing.
They drew lines on it to enhance or diminish figure stuff, you know. So I put on the suit, and I actually literally came on the set in this big sound stage, and there were people drawing lines on my suit while I was wearing it. It was an interesting experience.
One of the more painful things about the show as well was a dance belt. I had to wear a dance belt, and it's very much like a jock strap, except instead of having 2 straps in the back, you have 1. Well, the girls all know about this. This is, I guess, it's a G-string, isn't it? You know. But it made it very painful to sit down. There wasn't much sitting down on the set of Tron because of that.
That became a joke throughout the shoot for all of us actors. Jeff, you know, how's your dance belt today? A little tight? A little tight?
Train him for the games, let him hope for a while, and blow him away.
Lisberger, he did something that a more seasoned director I can't imagine doing. The set was littered with all of the latest video games. You can imagine all the cast and crew you know, wanting to rally them to get back to work, and they say, "Well, wait, just 1 second," you know, and that was often the case. And Steven was often right in there too, you know.
The idea of video games on the set, it created a moving cyberspace image that an actor could look at and then sort of transpose onto the blank set that he had to work on.
I'd be in the middle of a game, They would say, "Come on, Jeff, we're ready." I say, "No, I'm preparing for the scene."
How'd you do it?
I think that it was difficult for the actors to walk onto an all-black stage every day.
The fact that I did King Kong, that probably worked against me doing Tron, because it's not very much fun doing all the blue screen stuff. I find it really, as an actor, it's quite frustrating. They try to describe what you're looking at, and they say over there's, you know, a huge monster, or, you know, a light cycle, or, you know, whatever they're going to describe, and you have to, you don't know as an actor, am I overacting here? Am I you don't, it's hard to, you know what you do, so you usually kind of try to bracket your work and give it, you know, maybe too much, too little. Finally, it gets to the editor, and he's got to paste it all together and make it look right and as real as possible. So the fact that it was all going to be black with white adhesive tape to delineate the different shapes and stuff was kind of not a plus for me.
There's a piece of tape X'd right there, and that's what you're to be looking at. That's where you're going to run, or that's the enemy. That's the bad guys at Sark coming at you there. You're looking off in the distance at him. And Steven is directing us in these things, very much like the early silent films, you know. Until we had to say something. All right, you're looking off. You're seeing it. It's coming at you.
Yeah, every day it would be like when Steven said, "You're on the Solar Sailor," and you're going, "The Solar Sailor, okay." And then, you know, he showed me the picture, and that meant a little more. And I remember at one point saying, "Steven, I really don't understand a lot of what I'm saying." And he goes, "No problem. Just say it with conviction. Just you're there, you're doing it. That's where you are."
It was very confusing, I must say. As a matter of fact, I think we had worked for a couple of days when the actors, Jeff Bridges and Bruce and the rest of us, got together and wondered, what's this all about? So we went to Steve Lisberger, you know, and he explained to us that we were in a pinball machine, which came as a great revelation to all of us. Yeah, interesting. And it suddenly dawned on us what was happening around us. But it took a little time, I must say.
It really brought me back to much more of a theater experience. Because I believe on stage, you know, so many kinds of plays that I did, there was no scenery. It was very much like that on Tron. And you created the world for the audience. And we very much had to do that ourselves with your imagination. You know, you had to paint that picture with your words and everything for your audience.
There aren't really any tanks, and there aren't really any things, but when you get into that mindset, it becomes real for you. And that's kind of what was going on. We just got into that innocent frame of mind where we just believed.
We were encouraged, all of us, to wear very colorful clothes to work, because everything, the sets, the costumes, were all black and white. I remember after a day's work, you would come out and you'd go outside and be just bombarded by color.
Practically all the images I have of Tron is something really serious and dangerous was happening. But I wasn't quite sure what it was, because that all happened, that was penciled in or airbrushed in after we got finished shooting the picture.
What we propose to do is to change something into nothing and back again.
Livermore Lab in Northern California. That was very cool.
When we're entering, there's this huge, thick door.
Now that is a big door.
That was done at night, and right next to where we were shooting, they had roped off and said some radioactive spillage had happened. There were signs warning, don't cross this rope. And I'm going, that's just that rope? It's going to stop? That's, you know, we're walking, the guys are dragging cables around the area. I said, how do we know it didn't drip over this way?
There was a roped off area, I remember, and as usual, I paid no attention to it. And when I needed my makeup touched up, so I was on my way over to get that done. And I just stepped into the roped off area, and everybody around went, "Stop!" And I had stepped into what apparently was a live nuclear little area. And I had to stand very still until my shoe was professionally denuclearized.
I had to master, or somewhat be fairly athletic with the disc thing. Stephen wanted to test me, and he got kind of angry with me. He said, I want to see what you can do. I don't think you've been doing the work you need to be doing, and I want to see what you can do. We're going to be shooting this thing this week, and blah, blah, blah. And it got a little, and I think he was, and I'm sure of it now, he was kind of really trying to anger me, get me up there. And I said, it's like, oh, you want high noon? Is that what you want? You want a showdown? Okay. And so there we are on the black set, the big old soundstage. Everyone's gone for lunch. And there was one shot that I knew he thought that he was going to get me on, and I'm so very proud because it is in the final thing. When you imagine someone throwing a Frisbee right at your head, very hard, ducking it and catching it as it's passed over your head. It went like this, and before it leaves completely, whoa! And he was up on a big ladder, and he shot it straight down at me. And I caught that thing, I think it was like the first take. I just, boom, like there. And I just looked up at him defiantly. And he just yelled, cut, cut. And then he just broke into a big grin with that beard of his. And, you know, he thought, that's it, man. And everybody was going, whoa, you know, like.
Flynn, help Tron. My grandmother started a letter writing campaign right after the movie was released. My 92-year-old grandmother at the time. She started writing and had all her little Hadassah friends in New York writing. Just the words, re-res ram, re-res ram.
I still don't understand why you want to break into the system.
Because, man, somewhere in one of these memories is the evidence.
Jeff was Kevin Flynn. Kevin Flynn was Jeff Bridges. I mean, there was no delineation.
Some people don't know this, but this is is one day a week where I wear this helmet all day long, and it seems to bring peace to me. And I can't get too close to a computer when I have this hat on because there's a sort of a magnetic pull into the computer, so I have to stay away from them.
You shouldn't have come back, Flynn.
Hey, it's the big master control program everybody's been talking about.
I had been very influenced by Disney my whole life, you know, as we all were growing up with his films. And part of the confidence we had to try to push the envelope this much was bolstered by the fact that you sort of felt that somewhere in, you know, in the back of the stage there was, you know, Walt's ghost saying, yeah, this is good stuff. Let's see what we can do with this.
The biggest problem on a large-scale effects film, especially when it comes to producing and creating and making the effects, is that oftentimes the director's vision is so large, becomes impractical. Stephen had brought to the whole concept, he had worked out how he thought it could best be done. And the saving grace was he already understood what the problems were going to be.
What was staggering was the actual technique that we finally used, which was to blow up every single frame of 75 minutes of film to a 14-inch Kodalith, and then treat a live-action movie like an animated movie.
So even though we shot live-action footage, we turned each frame back into individual frames or individual cells. Think of them as animation cells, but they're not hand-drawn. They're made photographically.
Ironically, there's very little computer power put to this. A good portion of Tron is done with what we call backlight compositing. You photograph the actors in basically a white costume against black, and then on the costume you have some what looks like circuitry in black. You photograph that onto black and white.
Well, the black and white was it was just the most elegant way to do it. You know, obviously if we were doing stuff in color, we couldn't really evaluate what the flush tones were going to do, even though they were made up in a kind of black and white fashion. So it was a more elegant solution.
Once we had the photography, then those individual frames of film were put into 2 photorotoscope machines. That is, basically takes the film, projects it down onto a new piece of film that's a large piece of film, approximately 20 inches by 12 inches. The live action footage is projected on that, and then this large piece of film is put through a processor to make high-con film. High-con film is film that is entirely opaque or clear, so light can't pass through the opaque area. So for each one of those frames, we made X number of high-con positives and negatives. So a negative of someone with a white costume with black lines on it would be black and the lines being clear. There were basically, for each live-action character, an exposure for the main body, there was an exposure for the circuits, there was an exposure for the whites of the eyes and the whites of the teeth, maybe one other pass. So it was roughly 5 passes per character.
So after you've isolated all these different areas, you have to still photograph each isolated area separately over and over onto one frame of film, and oftentimes you're having these layers. The simplest one would be 6, 7 layers deep. The most complex one could be 25, 30 layers deep.
For each second of film, there were 24 transparencies and 24 high-cons, positives and negatives of different types with different masks over them that were put under animation cameras. I think we had 15 in the end animation cameras throughout town and here at Disney that had a uniform light source behind it with the same registration pins. The film that we used, the high-con and the continuous tone film, was a special edition that Kodak made for us. It was pre-punched because nobody has ever done a film like that before and nobody ever will again. It was, at that time, the solution to the design problem.
We had the exhibitors showing in Las Vegas in October. We completed production, shooting the live action in July, and we had basically 3 or 4 months to put together what we thought would be not too difficult a task of 2 minutes worth of footage with full color completed. And we figured that if we were able to do that and do it efficiently and do it well and get to the point in October where we knew how it was going to be done, that would be our research and development. We also have 2 minutes worth of the film. And we achieved it. The bad news was it had really taken a lot of people, a lot of time and a lot of effort, far more people than we thought we would ever involve, and still a month for 1 minute of film, and we had approximately 45 minutes of backlight compositing plus another 15 to 20 minutes worth of CGI to do. Well, it was going to take us 60, 70, 80 months to do this film. I think there was a sense of denial, because if you thought at the beginning you're not going to be able to get away with 2 scene coordinators, you eventually will need 12 or 14. Everybody would say, well, then we're not going to do it. The studio would have said, no way. You can't do that. That has huge budgetary implications.
We sent all that film, all the frames to the film flew across the Pacific to Taiwan, where the Cuckoo's Nest, that was their actual name. Roughly 85 people under the supervision of Arnie Wong did this inking and painting, holding out all these different circuits and sending them back to our scene coordinators in the Disney studios.
It came back very quickly, and we were very pleased by that until the cameramen opened up the boxes and started to literally lay the cells down on the backlight boxes over the camera to photograph them, and we found that the paint had not dried sufficiently, so that all the cells were stuck together. So I went down and said, "How's it going, guys?" And they're going, "Not real well."
System's got more bugs than a bait store.
So we called Arnie and said, "Arnie!" We were very calm. "Tell them they can't put them in the boxes until they're dry."
There's a great funny story about the fact that we started putting the footage together and we realized that at random moments the Codalus would glitch. At random frames, all of a sudden it would get lighter or darker, and we couldn't figure out what was happening. And one night it was literally the middle of the night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning or something, and I was laying in bed, and I guess my brain just, for a year, wouldn't shut down even when I wanted it to. All of a sudden, it occurred to me that the problem might be in the film, how the film was purchased from Kodak. Normally, film is made in a continuous long sequence so that any variations in the film are invisible if you use the film in the order Kodak sends it to you. And in this case, I thought maybe we're doing something to the film, and I called up Harrison, and he agreed to meet me.
Harrison.
Yeah, woke up Harrison in the middle of the night, and he's wearing his pajamas and bathrobe, wandering through the halls of Disney. I mean, it's a priceless moment.
We made it.
I figured out we were loading the film off the trucks. The film came in huge trucks from Kodak, and we were randomly stacking it in the basement of the special effects building. And sure enough, the boxes had all been numbered by Kodak so that we would use them in the correct order, because they were not all the same. The emulsion on the film did vary by as much as half an f-stop. And we finally figured it out. We put the boxes in the right order. We used the film correctly. And then what we did was from that point on, any footage that had this problem, that's where you have the little zingers going through the background, like little pulses of light.
We just had a sound effect there because it was an electronic world, and sometimes things glitch.
The new guy was asking about you. It's too bad he's in a match now. I'll probably never meet him.
In the other scenes, the backgrounds that are having all that light animation and things moving through them, that was all done by our background department that composited big transparencies that were backlit to be the background. See, one of the keys in Tron is that the animation always has light moving through it, whether the characters express themselves with animation.
Take him.
That's all done with reveal animation, where you're uncovering these icons and letting light come through them and covering them back up and doing repeated passes doing that. So those backgrounds were done not with computer simulation in most cases.
We knew that it was different, that's for sure, mostly because we weren't painting in color. In traditional background painting, you have a master background painter who does all the keys, and your job as a background painter is to emulate the style and the color as much as you can. Well, this on Tron was all painting in value, black, grays, and white, painting all with an airbrush. I really got to know an airbrush well, and I don't love it. And the way we had our layouts were from the live action photographs that they were taking on this big soundstage and then transferring them to us. And that's what we used as our guides.
Want me to slow down your power cycles for you?
Wait! I need that!
When Sark is being tortured, or when Flynn gets touched with a wand and you see that blast of energy, there's an effect on that animation. It's actually steel mesh. It's silkscreen steel mesh that's over the lens of the camera. It takes that single image and makes it become multiple images. So there are all these different filters, colors, diffusion filters for the artwork under the camera as well as lens effect. And we had to come up with terms for these, you know, so go to glow, those kind of expressions all came about as kind of just functional things. When we had the dailies, if the scene was correct and I thought that we could sign off on it, it was a hero. And those are just expressions that evolved through animation and people making up stuff as we went along.
We loved the effects animators because we were always excited when we saw a shot with effects animation. I mean, they just did a great job. And it was one of the areas where they were always ahead of the game. They were always doing more work than they were given so that we were able to utilize them to really kind of add stuff to the film. And because we were very fortunate to have, oh gosh, probably a dozen effects animators and their assistants, at least, maybe even more, on the film, headed by Lee Dyer, and they did a great job. And they were often, well, let's say, called in to help certain shots. And if you look at the film carefully and you look at the backgrounds, there's all sorts of wonderful bits of effects animation that go on in the background. Everything from a Pac-Man in one scene up on the wall to just other things that really add a certain kind of electronic worldliness to this, to the film. The integration of what was basically a completely different technology and a very labor-intensive one, that of the backlight compositing, and the computer graphics, was challenging, to say the least, especially in the light cycle sequence where the actors, the characters, get into a CG environment, and also the tanks themselves. When the characters get inside there, you're talking about a set that's inside a CG, a computer-generated vehicle. Part of what helped integrate the two things together was that we made the backgrounds for the backlight compositing look as much like computer-generated as we could. Around the MCP is crevasses, beautifully done by a computer and laid out. And when we first saw the wireframe, we thought, wow, that's really gonna be cool because we'll have the characters jump from one to the other. Oh, that'll be simple, you know, you get the characters down on the stage to jump from one to the other, and then we, you know, generate the computer and it'll be great. Suddenly, I realized, to my chagrin, that I now had to replicate on the stage what the computer had done. Now, since the computer is very accurate, it should be very simple to replicate on the stage, which we did. And so sure enough, we put the camera in the right spot, and then we would tell the computer that this is where the camera was, so give us the background that would correspond. And then when we put the things together, sure enough, they weren't even close. They were jumping into crevasses and all over nothing seemed to match up. Our only solution was basically to slip and slide things, make things work, and do whatever we could, because what the computer at that time could not really take into account was lens distortion. So all this very hard hand work to make something look like it came from a computer was really done by human beings. We knew that there was a lot of computer graphics to do for this film. And it was always intended that we do about 15 or 20 minutes, which was a huge amount. Nobody had ever really undertaken that amount.
Yeah, after the initial terror of realizing that we were going to use a medium no one had ever used before, including us, we started to recognize the unique possibilities of working in the computer and the things that it would do for us, that would free us from camera movement and free us from all kinds of restraints. And it would give us the ability to do something that was very difficult to do in 2D, and that is actually go into the scene, to do Z moves, actually immerse yourself within objects and travel as if you were a point of view. That's something that you couldn't do. Remember, drawings you can go back and forth and up and down, but you can't go in.
So if you look at the stylization of Tron, there are several major conceptual decisions we made. One was that there was no sun in the electronic world. Everything had its own light. It was all made of energy, so the world that we designed had a very specific design style based on what we could do with the live action characters, what we could do with the CG, and how we could marry them. Because it's a fantasy world, you can make those rules up. The vehicles, the flying scenes, the moving stuff, the light cycles, of course, the whole MCP sequence is all computer generated. The backgrounds, every part of that is CG. There was no Photoshop. There was no manipulating objects like graphics in a two-dimensional way. The modeling of objects was incredibly complicated and difficult, and Magi Synthevision had their way, but it had limits as to what kind of shapes you could create. You couldn't create any shape you could imagine. When it had multiple curves, you couldn't, create a spline or rotate an object to create a shape. And then the render time for frames was phenomenal. I mean, it was 10 minutes a frame or that type of thing.
All right, let's get this show on the road.
This was before the world went digital, so we were talking about computers and companies that were one of a kind. Each one had their own hot rod, turboed in its own way. They had their own software and hardware and their own film recorders, and they were diverse. Maybe they shared some algorithms here and there, but it was on the very beginning edge of where that technology was and becoming somewhat dependable.
When you went to these places, it was as if one was going into weird occult mystical laboratories where people were conjuring up things that the rest of the world felt very uneasy about. It's a hard thing to convey to people today what it felt like then. But there was something sort of like, oh my God, these are Frankenstein labs, and when these creatures come forth, we're all going to pay a price.
There were 4 companies that worked on the film: Magi Synthevision, Information International, Robert Abel and Associates, and Digital Effects. The real world, the electronic world transition that was done in the movie, which was done by the Abel Studios, was done by Kenny Merman, and it was a very unique and beautifully designed piece, I thought. That was really complex. That was actually shooting vector graphic computers, making a whole bunch of lines add up to be a shape, putting color filters on the camera, shooting a pass, then putting bipac mats in the camera, shooting another pass, and there are lots of incredible amounts of time and energy put into that transition. When you're actually going down that first tunnel, there's like blue static kind of stuff flashing around in there. That's actually static from the bipac mag. And there was so many passes, and so many times, every time that they tried to do it, they always got this static discharge. But it was there, and there was no way we could really finally get rid of it, so hey, put a sound effect there, you know. The other company that worked on the picture was Digital Effects, a company in New York City that Judson Rosebush had put together. They did the Tron logo at the beginning, where you see the pieces coming together to form the character, and they also did the bit.
2 companies, Magi Synthevision in New York and III here in Los Angeles, we're going to do the majority of the work.
The way the work was divided up between the 2 companies was that Magi Synthevision did generally the more simple objects because their modeling system put basic geometries together. By adding and subtracting primary shapes, you create an object, and that's how they modeled. Even though they might look complex on film, they did the light cycles, the recognizers, the tanks.
One of the reasons we asked Magi Synthevision to do the light cycles specifically is that the design by Sid Mead of the light cycles was such that you could take these basic geometric shapes and slice them and dice them and kind of put them back together again, and you came up with a light cycle that was really pretty cool and pretty incredible. And coming off a design of Sid Mead, it looked bang, it looked exactly like it.
For things that had multi-curves and more complex designs, Information International was far superior on that level because they were making polygonal models where you would literally draw an object out in 3 views, divide it up into polygons, and encode those images the drawings were huge, like this, and there was a big digitizing tablet. It was 4 by 6 feet roughly, and so every little point was digitized. So you're making a wire mesh type model rather than solid objects interpenetrating each other. So they had 2 diverse ways of making models, and III's was much more complex. So III did Sark's Carrier and the Solar Sailor and the MCP and things that had multi-curves and shapes. There was one computer at Information International, the computer, not like we had multiples. We had one race car, and it was called the Foonly. And the whole thing was this big old hardwired computer that was about as big as 4 deep freezers put together, you know, roughly 15 feet by about 8 feet wide. And this thing would glitch. You know, you just never knew when it was going to glitch. We finally ran preventive maintenance on it all the time. That didn't really assure anything, because really somebody walking into the room that you know had on a fur coat could set the thing off. So it was really walking on thin ice with that computer, and it was the iris that everything that came out of III had to go through. So if it ever really broke down in some major way, we would not have made the movie.
III had a very, very tough job. They had to create the Solar Sailor, which we knew what we wanted it to look like, but Stephen was insistent that it have translucent sails. And I lobbied somewhat heavily for non-translucent sails. I said, you know, Stephen, we could be sinking ourselves here, excuse the pun, with the Solar Sailor if we go with translucent sails. And he said, quite rightly, look, the look of it needs to be ethereal. It needs that translucency. It needs to be magical craft. And if it has solid sails, it just doesn't work. It doesn't look as beautiful. It's not as elegant. And so he stuck to his guns. And when we saw the creation of the Solar Sailor, which was one of the first things that III did, and as it builds up and you see these wonderful translucent sails, I tell you, there were a lot of great moments during that year, and that was one of them. And so there was certainly a different look to what the 2 different companies were going to do, always searching for that consistency. We didn't want it to look like, oh, well, this company did this part of the film and this company did this part of the film. In fact, there are areas in the film right in the middle where the transition takes place where you do see shots that are Magi Synthovision shots and then Triple I shots and then a Magi Synthovision shots, and they all work together very well. So we were very fortunate that despite the two different technologies, we still had a consistency.
I was working at the Disney Studios. I was an animator on Mickey's Christmas Carol when Tron was being produced. Two of my friends, Jerry Reese and Bill Croyer, were working on Tron, and they were doing the storyboarding and the choreography, you might say, of all the computer animation. They were over in one of the trailers, and they had a computer that was hooked via phone line back to New York with Magi Synthovision. And my good friend Chris Wedge was back there working on the animation, and he would send over the phone line the scenes frame by frame by frame for them to look at, some of the early renderings. For me, this was some of the very first computer animation I had ever seen, and it was so exciting. The first scene that I remember them working on was the light cycle sequence, and it absolutely blew me away.
You had to have a completely symbiotic relationship with the computer technicians. You know, they had never done film, and we had never used computers. You couldn't have all the tools you wanted because you didn't know what tools you would need. It became this process of learning about what the technology could do and then brainstorming the creative side to use it. There really was no software to make anything move. There was only software to describe where things sat. And if you wanted something to go from here to here, it was literally as simple as, you know, X is 4, now X is 6, there's 2 units, and that was that. I mean, there was just nothing else, you know, around. So suddenly, Jerry Reese and I, who were the only animators on the whole show, were faced with the situation of trying to create what we consider to be Disney's quality animation, which meant animation that moved with personality and moved with drama. And we had to do it with no tools. You weren't able to even pull a wireframe up on the screen and make it move. Couldn't even do that. You could only see a wireframe, a very primitive wireframe, at one frame at a time. And you could ask for frame 1 and frame 20 and frame 60, and you can kind of see them, but you could never see them move. But what was kind of terrifying about Tron is we would plot out these very complicated moves. We'd have vehicles chasing each other down irregular canyons with cameras flying through the air and twisting and rolling and diving. And all that had to be done with these very simple graphs. We had to go ahead and break it down frame by frame by frame, increment by increment, because let's say you've got an object, like a light cycle. A light cycle, for every frame that it moves, it will need at least 6 numbers to describe its position. It will need its X, Y, and Z translations to show where it is in space, and then it will need its yaw, pitch, and roll to describe how it's tilting. So that means for 100 frames, you need 600 numbers of data. 100 frames is 4 seconds. So you need 600 numbers to describe where it is. Now you can imagine us sitting around writing 600 numbers for 4 seconds for one thing, right? So what we would do is we would figure out on graph paper, okay, the light cycle is going to start here on frame 1, and then 3 seconds later on frame 72, it's going to be over here, and it's going to travel an S curve. So gee, if I just take frame 1, frame 20, frame 60, and frame 72, I'll just take those 4 frames, I'll run down the hall, I'll plug those into the Oxbury computer thing, I'll hit a button, and all these numbers will come up. And then I just sat there with my exposure sheet, and I wrote down all 600 numbers on an X sheet. And we gave these guys at the computer company these exposure sheets with 6 rows of numbers for every single frame. And they went and they hand programmed them in. They typed them in. There was no way to just like download it. You know, you didn't have a floppy disk you could put it on. You just, you typed it.
Come on, you scuzzy data, be in there. Come on.
And then the very, very first time we would see it move would be in 70 millimeter on the stage. We would go to the sound stage at Disney, and we would stand there in front of a gigantic 70 millimeter screen, and they would reel this film up, 70 millimeter film on a projector, and they'd run it. And that'd be the very first time we'd see it move. That was our pencil test.
You look at any PlayStation 2 game or an Xbox game, and the complexity of the visual there is infinitely more complex than Tron, and it's on the fly. You know, and the movie Tron, Flynn is playing a raster graphic game, you know, driving a tank through, and it's all shaded and everything. At that time, that was, the games that people were playing were, you know, Asteroids and Pong, and they were like 2D.
There were times when the studio would say, is this all really going to come together at the end? And Harrison and I and Richard and Bruce and Donald, and we'd say, oh yeah, this is fine. And then we'd shut the door and go in our little room and we'd say, oh my God, you know, there's so much that has to be pulled together here.
When we first saw the footage, I don't think anyone really knew what they were looking at. I think we all thought we did, and we'd seen a lot of film, and we wanted to, you know, oh sure, you know, this is going to be great. I don't know for a fact that anybody really did know. I'm not sure Steven actually knew, because until it was all put together, you know, and you had just a lot of pieces of things, you weren't really quite sure. It's not that unlike, frankly, when, you know, the first time you look at a Toy Story or a Toy Story 2 or a Bug's Life, you're looking at something that, you know, for the thing, I'm not quite sure, because it just doesn't look the same. You know the finished product is going to be great. In the case of Tron, we didn't know what any of it was going to be.
I had no idea what was going to happen. None. I did have an idea when some guy walked up to me on Hollywood Boulevard as I'm walking along, dum-diddy-dum, dum-diddy-dum. Some guy says, sure. I said, yeah? He says, I hate your nose. I said, huh? He says, I hate your nose. I said, why? He says, I have been painting your nose frame by frame for a year. I hate your nose. I just laughed. I mean, literally, one guy had my nose for a year.
So we would look at sections of the film, and they would give us some relief from our constant worry that this section seems to be working out.
Yeah.
Now, how's that section doing? And I remember when John Shealy brought me the first composited frames of Yori's character, and they were just beautiful. I mean, the colors, the way they laid in, and the backlight, and the computer background, and it all married up so beautifully. And it was wonderful to see. It was a little bit terrifying, because at that point, I realized the potential of working this way, that we could make color so bright, we could make images so startling, that, that I felt a little bit like the Sorcerer's Apprentice now. The film came out, and it was just after the E.T. situation had occurred, and I think it was a difficult situation for Disney, because they weren't used to saying, we've got the cutting-edge movie, and we don't have the cute, cuddly movie. And I'm sure they were envious of the money that was happening on the other side of town. It was true. I mean, this film was cutting edge. The people that loved it just went nuts for it. We were just so proud of the fact that we managed to complete it, and that one could watch it for 100 minutes, and that it added up, and it worked, because it was such a highly experimental film.
This is a business where people want to believe, and they give you as much rope, and if you can run with it, they'll let you run with it. The interesting thing is, it was the first film I've ever made. Other than a cartoon, I'd never been involved in making a film, and just to have a budget, almost in a sense, an unlimited budget to make the film, that can only happen in Hollywood, believe me.
I've been hoping you'd send me somebody with a little bit of guts.
There was so much anticipation for it that it really had expectations that frankly could never have been met. You know, everyone was so excited, and they wanted it to do so well. We needed it to do so well, and it had so much that was riding on it that no matter what it did, you always wanted it to do more. It did great, you know, and I think everyone was satisfied, and we all wanted it to do more. We all thought it could have, frankly, and I think it was, again, if there was any miscalculation at all in the entire process, it was where the world was at the time. If Tron had come out, you know, in 1990, the results would probably been one of the biggest movies of all time.
The Motion Picture Academy refused to nominate Tron for special effects because they said we cheated when we used computers, which in the light of what happened is just mind-boggling.
The computer-generated image has a certain plastic look to it. It's perfect, you know, just pure colors and little glints and highlights. And it looks so perfect that it looks as though the human hand could not have made it. And nowadays, it's considered kind of a bad thing. I mean, people work overtime to try to figure out ways to make it look more gritty or realistic or more textured somehow, which is fine. But at the time, I mean, in 1981, it was such a revolutionary image that we were all kind of fascinated by it. I thought that was one of the things that really made Tron kind of unique, because that whole design sensibility sort of spread itself throughout the whole movie. I thought it was the visual landmark film that it really is. And I was amazed that nobody else picked up on that, or so few people did. The press didn't pick up on it, and just, you know, the general public didn't pick up on the idea that this was something really, really different. And I remember thinking, you know, people are going to remember this movie.
Probably the most fun I ever had. It was just that. It was just all of us on the set just going to that place, that space where when I was a little kid, we used to play Army. Only there were no tanks. I mean, there was no solar sailor, but we went to that space, and it was that state of innocence you have to get to believe absolutely anything. Be susceptible to suggestion and just open your mind up, and to get to that space, it's kind of a happy sort of a thing to have that kind of innocence that, okay, let's just dive into this thing. And we did. It was fun. The suits were tight.
We were up on Cape Cod for the summer, and my daughter and I went over to Hyannis to see Tron that was playing at the local theater there. And it was a Saturday afternoon. And I looked around me and I knew that, well, whatever it is, these kids sure love it. You know, but I did enjoy the picture, and I was just astounded at what was done with it.
I'd kind of dismissed Tron for a while there, and then I realized all these young people are coming up to me, and with Tron posters, Tron the cassettes and stuff, like covers from the cassettes. Would I sign this? And I keep going, and then I would talk to them as I'm doing this, and they're going, "Oh, it's my favorite movie." And so many kids grew up since the early '80s with this thing.
7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 14-year-olds. When they say, "Yeah, what have you been in?" "I was in Tron." They go, huh?
Young people, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, they didn't have any fears or preconceptions about all of these things. And for the most part, they really embraced the film. They had a sense, I think, of this is where the future was going, and it was going to belong to them.
We were actually immersed in that new world for those 2 years. And I think that we saw and felt so many exciting things about the new frontier that we felt that we could never get a fraction of those up on the screen, and we couldn't give that feeling. I mean, the idea of Flynn going into this new world and making all these discoveries, I mean, that was a metaphor for what we did as workers. And I think that all of us that worked on it have gone on and we've become like Flynn's. You know, we've delved into that new world, and it's been a rare privilege and an excitement to be working in a field where every day you go to work and you realize that you may do something that no one has ever done before. I think very few artists get that chance, and that's been one of the greatest things about working in computer graphics since then.
What a treat to have worked on Tron at, you know, its infancy. What a treat to have worked on Toy Story when we made that jump to, you know, a completely computer animated film. And I still feel like we are really in our infancy. We've taken a good step in the last 20-odd years, but I know that when I, in another 20 years, come back and call me, and we'll look back at Toy Story or Monsters Incorporated and Tron and kind of laugh at what we've done and remember how hard it was at the time. And then, you know, we'll have made some great strides again. We have a ways to go.
For me, it really showed the talent of the filmmakers also, and to understand how the imagery was limited at the time. You could only really do geometric shape. The shading and the lighting was fairly primitive, and everything had a cold look to it. So they created this world inside of a computer that then the computer created. It was the perfect marriage of the technology and the subject matter. It was fantastic from that standpoint. So I think it really will always stand as one of the milestones of computer animation. I mean, without Tron, there would be no Toy Story.
Tron stands alone. It's there's nothing to compare Tron to, and it's really fun to have been a part of it.
When we made the original Tron, we were at the edge of what technology could do, and we dove off. Well, the world is entirely different now. The complexity is immense. But good storytelling is still there, and there's, places we can go that nobody's been. And, my favorite expression is that it should remind you of something you've never seen before.
Effects these days are in the hands of every man. You can go shoot a movie on your own of high quality, of broadcast quality, with camcorders. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're seeing better movies. Shakespeare didn't have a word processor. When we got word processors, we didn't get Shakespeare's. We got to separate the two out. There's creativity, there's technology, and the two are interrelated, but technology is not necessarily creative.
Get into your brain, just open it up and just explore. I think that was sort of what was happening at Lisberger Studios, is we didn't think about the consequences. We didn't think about, well, certainly I'm sure Steve had to spend some hours thinking about how he was going to get this thing done. But the primary force was thinking about, let's create a world. What would this world be like? And get excited about something. I think that's the main thing for any creative person, is keeping that excitement, following things, exploring things, and keeping an open mind.
I think the world is ready for a new Tron. The audiences have grown immeasurably since its initial release. I think as Tron, like a great wine, has just gotten better with age, and I think what it started in filmmaking, from that point on, it's been forever changed, and it's been able to take audiences to new worlds and new places they never dreamed of going before. And it would be fun, and we've certainly, talked to Steve about it and tried to get him excited about what it might be to go back and do a new Tron. I think if we come up with the appropriate story and appropriate idea and can put all the different pieces together, that would be fun to do.
I think that we're in a transitional time where the next generation is now going to try to find another frontier in all of this. And I think some of these frontiers are obvious, which is, we have all of this technology, what are we going to do with it? It can't be just another phone system. And it's obviously going to get more and more involved with biology and medicine. And it's also going to help us deal with how we're going to keep this world together. And I think, okay, we've built the system, and now we have to put it to use. And I think, so I'm actually very optimistic about the future, but I just think this is a sort of a time of regrouping before the next frontier will grow out of it.
End of line.